I mean,
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Misty Maris here at Law&Crime.com. We're here today watching clips from the Todd Kendhammer case. Todd Kendhammer found guilty yesterday by a jury, a very interesting trial. Lots of twists and turns there, especially his own testimony, which we will be continuing to air clips from that trial as the day goes on. Right now, though, we're going to turn to some other issues that are popping up in the news, namely the NFL. Obviously, this year for the NFL has had a lot of twists and turns. We've seen issues relating to the national anthem. We've seen issues with concussion lawsuits. There's certainly been a lot going on in that arena. Now, the most recent development, a New Orleans Saints fan is suing the team for $8,000, so that's the price of his season tickets, saying that protests during the national anthem created an atmosphere that made the tickets unusable. Kind of an interesting argument here that we're going to break down with our guest today, Ken Shopshire. He's a professor at Arizona State University and an expert in sports law. Ken, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yes. Well, okay. So I saw this lawsuit, and I'm, as an attorney myself and a defense attorney, I said, this is an interesting one, because whenever you get a ticket to an event, I'm sure we all go. We're lawyers, so we're maybe a little bit more litigious, but I've never turned my ticket around and read all of those fine print on the back to learn when I can get a refund, when I can't get a refund, what rights I have as a ticket holder, because that's really what this case is, right, Ken? It's a breach of contract case. It's a little funny.
No, that's right.
If any time a player upset you or the team, something didn't go your way at a game, if you could bring a breach of contract case, I think we'd be seeing a lot more lawsuits. But Ken, break this down for us. What's this case really about?
Well, I think you're exactly right. I mean, in theory, it's a breach of contract case. And as you mentioned in law school, there are all these cases about going into a parking garage and getting a ticket with a bunch of stuff on the back that binds you if your car gets dented, that sort of thing. But you haven't had a chance to read it. But, there's a form of a contract. Well, same thing, the ticket to a game. But more broadly with a sporting event, I mean, what are your expectations when you go to a sporting event? What is it that the team is promising you by virtue of you paying to go to the game? And it is to see a sporting event. And part of sport is you never know what's going to happen on or off the field. There's some degree of, at a baseball game, you accept the liability, the ball might hit you and that sort of thing. But the idea that there's a promise that there won't be a player protest, the promise that you won't hear, part of the allegation here, bad language around you, that's not part of the agreement. So it's difficult to understand exactly what the plaintiff is seeking here. But it is, one thing that is for sure, I think, you don't typically bring a suit for $8,000 unless you want to provide some commentary or make some sort of statement.
Yeah, that is definitely true, Ken. When you're talking about $8,000, it's expensive to even go into litigation. So usually something like $8,000, it wouldn't be something you'd be pursuing. But obviously here, this fan is very upset. I'm going to read some of the information from the complaint that I think is interesting to your point, because yes, it's your classic breach of contract case, a promise and the fulfillment of that promise by the person that you're in a contractual relationship with. What I think is really interesting here is that his argument says that the Saints were actually condoning the behavior of the players and I guess the behavior of the fans. And I'm making an assumption about how the complaint's being articulated here, because really they condoned it by allowing the team to take this action. And he seems to be arguing a little bit like, oh, this is a pattern in practice. But does that even matter, Ken? I mean, isn't it all for acceptance, going back to law school there, Contracts 101? Does it matter if the team is condoning the behavior?
No, exactly. I don't think it matters. I mean, first of all, again, we just have a little bit of information based on the filing. There's not a whole lot of evidence about why the plaintiff thinks that Tom Bench, the owner, was condoning this, or the coach or others that he named in there. But that's not at all part of a breach of contract action. This drifts into something else. But again, there's no evidence that's indicative. But if they are condoning, if they are, the owner of the Miami Dolphins, Steve Ross, initially said it's okay with it. But what does that mean that he says athletes have the right to speech in a manner that they care to to deliver. So that's part of the confusion here as well. And there's certainly, if people look at the background on this, there's certainly some factual confusion about what actually happened here, what the players actually did, and how stressed out the plaintiff and his family were.
Yes, you bring up a great point, Ken, and one that I really wanted to dig into a little bit. I'm going to read you this tweet by Mark Ingram, and he's one of the players. It says, "The one time we protested, an anthem was an away game. After a team meeting, we decided to kneel as one before the anthem was played and stand united as one during the anthem. Good luck, dude. Peace sign." Okay, so Mark's point seems to be in response to the filing of this complaint and this lawsuit against the team. But again, and it goes back to what you were saying before, Ken, does that matter? Is it critical to the case whether or not they stood during the anthem at this particular game, at these home games? Is that going to be something that makes or breaks this, or does it not really matter at all?
Well, look, and I think that's where we should get to the point of the lawsuit. I think this plaintiff is upset that the players are protesting, and that they are protesting. The manner in which they've chosen is to get people to pay attention to them during the anthem, or in the case of the Saints, it seems to be before and after. I mean, it seems that they were standing respectfully during the anthem, but this plaintiff wants to raise the issue that I don't want these athletes to ruin my desire to just come to a sporting event and see a sporting event. But, all he needs to do is look over the history of time, the history of sport, and you see, go back to the 36 Olympics with Jesse Owens and Hitler. Go back to the 1968 Olympics. Go back to an AFL, NFL kind of moment in terms of all-star games in the mid-'60s, where the players protested against discrimination at the venue for an all-star game. So this is not new. It's not that you go to a sporting event and you don't anticipate there might be some form of protest. This is an old story. The protest in sport. I mean, Billie Jean King playing Bobby Riggs. That's a kind of politics and sports blended together. So it's not that this is ancient Greece and people are running around in big leagues and celebrating sport for the glory of sport. There's a lot more going on with these in the NFL, with these grown men that have real thoughts and feelings about what's going on in the world.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken, and that's a really great point. You're right. It's kind of a tale as old as time, right? It's not an isolated incident here, what we're seeing with the NFL, but is it kind of amped up a little bit more? And you hit the nail on the head in this complaint. It says I should be able to go to a sporting event and have it not be political. But you have the President of the United States actually sending out tweets about the NFL directly relating to issues that you wouldn't normally see the president getting involved in on an average day. It's not typically something that a president would be talking about. But here we have somebody the president who is engaging in this all the time, responding to the NFL. Could you make the argument, I'm just being a clever lawyer here, make the argument that you should have expected that there might be some political angle to a sporting event because you're on notice that the president's involved and these issues are political, and so when you bought those season tickets, you knew or should have known about that? Is that something valid that you could argue?
Well, it was the season before the protest began. Colin Kaepernick, I believe he's bringing this action about this season. He even references that there was political activity of the game earlier in the season. So if we take him at his word that maybe he didn't know this was going on, he paid $8,000 and he expected to see a sporting event. You still can't get past the idea that, look, there's been protests at sporting events before. People roll out banners. The guy, you're in the 70s and 80s, the guy with the rainbow hair that would stand behind the goalpost and would put up Bible passages. I mean, this is part of what we see at sport forever. So the idea that the NFL has promised that there won't be these kinds of activities at a football game just is not true. And the NFL is a private enterprise. We are going to deliver a football game. A lot of different things happen. Guess what? You're going to see injuries. You're going to hear people yelling. You're going to hear some language you may not appreciate. They don't list all this stuff. but this is what you know by virtue of going to sporting events that you're going to encounter. So again, it's very difficult. The two layers that are very difficult for me to understand the veracity of, I guess, is that you're really filing a lawsuit which costs you much more than $8,000 in the long run, thinking you'll get some sort of recovery. And then second, did you really not know these kinds of things would happen, and that there's not really a way, and this goes to President Trump too, to stop these men, especially these men, from doing what they want to do. I mean, essentially what they're saying, and Colin Kaepernick has led the way, is that we are willing to risk our job by making the statements that we want to make. So how do you stop that? And what kind of action? Again, if you just want $8,000, I would think probably the Saints are going to find a way to settle this whole thing and get rid of it so it doesn't linger out there too long. But if that's all you want, that's very different from what I think is really what he wants, the political conversation about we want you guys, the NFL, the teams, take more action against these players.
Right. It's more making a statement than actually making a case. I agree with you there, Ken. Do you think we're going to see more of these? Because that's really the fear that the team would have in settling the case, I suppose, because you're right, it will cost much more to litigate than to pay even half of what, the $8,000. Right. But does that set a precedent that all of a sudden you could see a flood of cases coming in? I mean, I don't know. I'm a Jets fan, so if I don't like the way the game turned out, am I going to be able to sue? I mean, there's going to be a lot of lawsuits there, right?
Well, that's the problem. What will this drift into? How far will this go? Will the floodgates then be open to bring lawsuits because a coach in a fan's mind made a bad decision in terms of a play they called or a player they put in or something like that? And, I paid for this season ticket and I expected first-class coaching. I didn't receive that, so therefore you breached my contract to deliver first-class coaching. The NFL and your Jets scurry around and say, well, I don't see that in any agreement we have with you. We have an agreement with you to be able to come to a football game, to sit in a seat, to watch the game, and other expectations are not specific.
Right, absolutely. I think you're right. So it will be interesting to see how this turns out. And if, as you said, if it snowballs into something bigger. Speaking of that, I want to talk a little bit more about the NFL and some of the issues that the NFL is facing. Obviously, we've seen a lot going on with these protests. The NFL struggling really with how to deal with it. And part of the reason that there was this issue, because it's not addressed in the current collective bargaining agreement. So the NFL players have a union, everything's collectively bargained, there's an agreement that they have there, and it doesn't speak to standing or kneeling during the national anthem. There's no rule on that. So if the rule is silence, it's a little bit more difficult for the teams to handle, and each team theoretically would have their ability to make their own rules for the employment of these players, if you're talking about the individual team's preference on how they handle the issue. So is that something we're going to see when the next collective bargaining agreement comes to pass? So that's 2021, so we've got a few more years. Are we going to see this issue being addressed so there isn't that question mark?
So I think by necessity, we will work our way through both the league and the players association that there have been extensive conversations at a number of levels about this. And partly the concern, and I give the league a lot of credit, is, this is an important issue. It's misnamed as a misnomer to call these anthem protests. There's not a protest against the anthem. The players have made it very clear. Our protest is against police brutality. It's against the lack of equality in society, racially and otherwise. So we're trying to bring attention to this issue, and we want you to move forward and understand this is what we're trying to address. And I would say success has come, at least bringing attention to the issue. I think that where lack of success has come is that it's drifted into being labeled an anthem protest. So, as that's worked through, and part of what we've seen too is the NFL has taken steps to financially support player and programs to deal with these kinds of social issues that they're protesting against. So I think all of that will move us, certainly by 2021, there's a new collective bargaining agreement to better address this issue and to better contemplate at least how to deal with the anthem type type issues, and at college sports, the players don't come out until after the anthem. Other leagues have specific agreements in their collective bargaining agreement. The NFL will find a way, and it may take some time.
Yes, and I think you're right, and that's a great example, as you said. Other leagues like the NBA, they have addressed these issues in their contracts, in their agreements, so there's a plan in place to deal with it. But you make a great point that it is almost a misnomer to call it an anthem protest, and it has gone a little bit off the rails there, and people are it's a very divisive issue, and many people are finding it to be something that they're not sure how to deal with, and that's where the NFL is going to have to handle that at some point. And I think you're right, they'll look to other sports, they'll look to other agreements and use that as a template moving forward. Circling back on that point, Colin Kaepernick, where this all began, has now filed a collusion grievance against the NFL, saying that he was illegally blackballed from the organization for kneeling. So it is illegal from a labor law perspective if you're talking about union rules and the Department of Labor and what is there. It's illegal to blackball somebody from an industry. Is that really what happened there, though? Isn't he was a free agent. He didn't have a contract. The NFL is a private corporate organization. Don't they have the ability to choose whether or not they want to hire him or not?
Well, yes, a very difficult case to make, more so in sports than probably anywhere else. Very difficult case to make in terms of their judgment, the individual teams, their judgment of his ability. So what you would need in this setting, because the NFL is not immune from antitrust action, what you would need is some sort of proof, some sort of smoking gun that there actually was a conversation amongst owners to not sign Kaepernick. I mean, that's really at the heart of what Mark Geragos, the great attorney, would have to prove in terms of finding that there actually was collusion. So, the question of whether or not he was good enough to play in the league and the thing that kind of armchair aficionados of the NFL are trying to analyze is not really what we get to, or what we would need to get to if this gets as far as litigation sometimes get. If it gets to the courtroom, if it gets to the jury, the question is going to be, can you prove that there was collusion, actual agreement amongst the owners to keep Colin Kaepernick out of the NFL? And that, I haven't seen the evidence yet. You can go circumstantial, you can go with the stats that armchair people are trying to deliver, but is there an email? Is there some sort of letter? Was there some sort of meeting? That's what we want to see in order to prove that there was actually collusion.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. I think that maybe we will see that. I mean, that would all come out in discovery, correct? Those would be the relevant documents that you would need in order to prove the case. So maybe we'll have more information about the substance of that case as time goes on. What I do think is interesting is from the NFL's perspective. So the NFL is obviously a for-profit corporation, and I think we were discussing before we came on air, $13 billion, something really huge. Feel that somebody is paying negative attention to the brand. How does that factor in, even if there is an email between the teams that says, hey, I don't think Kaepernick's right for the league because he's bringing negative attention to the brand? If that's the way they felt, I don't know. But is that an argument that the NFL would have?
It's interesting. So individually, and it's something that's not helpful for a franchise to say, but individually, franchises could say, and many have said, that Kaepernick is not good for our locker room, he's not good for our community, he's not good for our fans. So to make that individual decision is one thing, but for a business enterprise to collude, let's think about White House, the word collusion.
Collude, I've used that word more this past year than I have my entire life, but yes, anyway, continue.
For a business enterprise to collude, for all the 30-plus NFL owners to come together and say, we will not do this. I mean, that's classic antitrust. You got more than one party coming together to prevent someone's participation in commerce. So the basics are there, a private enterprise or not. I mean, the one league that has a form of exemption from the antitrust laws is Major League Baseball. But in terms of the NFL, unless it's part of the collective bargaining agreement and it appreciates the labor exemptions of the antitrust laws, they can suffer the consequences of collusion just as could any other business.
Right. So that's going to be what this turns on, right? That will be the fact that makes or breaks the case. I wanted to talk to you about something else, because in this whole process with the NFL dealing with these issues, dealing with fallouts from fans and supporters of the players, there was a donation made, $100 million promised to donate towards the causes that the players have been bringing to the attention of the public. Do you think that Goodell has quelled this issue for a little while? I mean, $100 million is a great pledge. Has this helped steady the waters a little bit here?
Well, the dollars, different amounts have been reported as to what the number of the NFL press release was close to that number, but there's over a period of time, there's different numbers out there, but it's a lot of money. I mean, so from that standpoint, there has been that question raised, but the players were deeply involved in negotiating. A number of players, primary group of protesters, were engaged in conversation with the NFL about how to set up this funding, about how to deliver funding to the right places. So I think this is a real positive. Will this be enough to stop every player from protesting? Well, it seems that not every player has agreed to this course by the NFL of being the answer that they're seeking in terms of where they're protesting. So I think we'll continue to see individuals step out and protest. I think it remains a bigger issue that the league is going to have to contend with, and I think even with with anthem kind of agreements with leagues and unions and other leagues, we're going to continue to see other kinds of activity elsewhere. I think this is the mode we're in with athletes today. We're in a mode where we have an athlete, and many people say LeBron James is leading the way, that is much more socially conscious, that is much more directly impacted by a lot of the issues that are important today in a way that we used to see up through the late 60s, early 70s, that we kind of lost sight of as athletes became more commercial, and there was a danger in losing endorsements and otherwise if you were involved in social activity. But if you have kind of the richest athlete in the world, at least one of them, LeBron James, saying, I'm going to speak to issues where I want to speak, that's a whole different model from when you had, for example, Michael Jordan, who was really bringing about this new age of athlete financial success, where he moved with a lot more caution in terms of the social issues you speak about.
Yes, Ken. Well, you're right. I mean, they certainly have the platform. They're role models to many people. So it is a place where they can stand and bring some attention to some of these issues. You brought up a point that I want to hash out a little bit more. When you're talking about the individual players, obviously we know what the NFL collective bargaining agreement says, or to a certain extent, at least on this issue, that it's silent to this issue. But if you're an individual player and you're signing a contract with the team, do you have the ability to bring this up in your contract and talk about, protesting? That do they have power to go in and deal with that in their individual contracts with the particular team that they're playing on?
Across the major sports, probably not. I mean, we think about player contracts, but they're largely formed with some amendments that are possible. Again, across sports, they vary, but they're largely about performance and the like. The idea of changing something that is about the conditions of the workplace and that sort of thing, those are collectively bargain type issues that an individual could not do on their own. So this will remain. This kind of gets embedded, and I think we'll hear a lot more about whether or not this falls into, as you mentioned earlier, there's a kind of a morals clause that talks about the cast negative light upon the business enterprise, the league, or the team by virtue of what you're doing. So it's very interesting to think about is protest something that's negative. The idea for different kinds of activity, even activities that have not been defined specifically in the player contract or the collective bargaining process. I mean, that's part of what sport is, and there are appeal processes for fines that may be issued in these settings. And again, this is not something that the league sought to arrest early on by virtue of issuing fines. So they've taken another path.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Ken. Your insights have been valuable to us to really break down some of these issues. We hope to have you back and to talk about this as more of these stories and cases unfold. We've definitely not heard the last of these issues, so we would love to welcome you back to talk about it as more of these cases come to light.
Sure. Look forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ken.